Hide their eyes, Ethan, or the king will know they are his before the snow stops falling. Those were the words Mrs. Calloway hissed beside me as the royal procession entered Ashbourne Square, and for one frozen second, the whole world seemed to narrow to the two small hands tucked inside mine. Noah stood on my left, Oliver on my right, both bundled in wool coats too big for their shoulders, both staring with the wide, fearless curiosity only 5-year-old boys could have. I had spent half a decade teaching them not to run into crowds, not to answer strangers, not to say our old last name, not to ask why we moved whenever men in black coats came through town. But I had never taught them how to hide the one thing no scarf, no hood, no lie could cover. Their eyes. Pale blue, sharp as winter glass, bright enough to cut through any shadow. His eyes. The eyes of Adrian Blackwood, the ruthless Alpha King. The same eyes that had looked at me once in a moonlit palace library as if I were not a servant, not an omega, not a mistake waiting to be erased, but the only warm thing left in his cold world. I pulled Noah's hood lower, then Oliver's, my fingers shaking so badly that Oliver glanced up at me and whispered, "Papa, are you scared?" I wanted to say no. I wanted to be the kind of father who could make the world gentle by sheer force of love. Instead, I forced a smile and squeezed his mittened hand. "Just stay close to me, sweetheart." The drums rolled across the square, deep and slow, vibrating through the cobblestones beneath my boots. The crowd parted as the royal guards advanced in perfect rows, their black uniforms dusted with falling snow, their silver crests catching the weak afternoon light. Then the carriage stopped. Every voice died at once. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Adrian Blackwood stepped down onto the snowy street like a shadow given a crown. He was taller than I remembered, wrapped in a long black coat edged with dark fur, his hair wind-tossed, his face carved into the same unreadable calm that had made noblemen lower their eyes and enemies reconsider their pride. People bowed around us. I did too, but only because I needed to drag the boys down with me. Noah resisted, peeking from beneath his hood. "Papa," he whispered, far too loudly, "why does the king look so sad?" My heart slammed against my ribs. Adrian's head turned. Not fully at first. Just enough for his gaze to sweep the crowd, passing over farmers, shopkeepers, schoolchildren, soldiers. Then it stopped on us. On my sons. On the two little faces half hidden beneath grey wool. Noah blinked up at him, innocent and unafraid, and the hood slipped back just an inch. It was enough. Adrian went still. Not surprised. Not angry. Still, in the way a storm goes still before it breaks. His eyes locked onto Noah's, then Oliver's, and something dangerous moved behind that royal mask. Recognition, impossible and immediate. My blood turned cold. I pulled the boys closer, lowering my face as if snow and silence could make us invisible. But kings were not fooled by prayers, and Adrian Blackwood had not become the most feared alpha in the country by ignoring the truth when it stood 10 feet away from him wearing children's boots. A guard leaned toward him, waiting for an order. Adrian said nothing. He only looked at me then, and for the first time in 5 years, the man I had run from saw the ghost I had become. His gaze moved over my brown hair, my plain coat, my trembling hands wrapped around our sons. I saw the exact moment memory struck him. Ethan. My old name seemed to pass through the air without sound. I stepped back. One step, then another. Mrs. Calloway caught my sleeve, her face pale beneath her bonnet. "Go," she breathed. I did not wait for permission from fear. I turned, lifting Oliver into my arms while Noah clutched my coat, and pushed through the edge of the crowd toward the alley beside my little bookshop. Behind us, the square remained silent. No shout followed. No command. No rush of boots. Somehow that was worse. Because I knew Adrian. When he wanted something, he did not need to chase. The world moved for him. I reached the alley, breath burning in my chest, snow melting on my lashes, the boys confused and stumbling beside me. Then, from across the square, low and unmistakable, his voice cut through the cold. "Find out who those children are." The alley behind the bookshop had never felt so long. I hurried through the narrow passage with Oliver pressed against my chest and Noah's hand locked in mine, my boots slipping on the thin skin of ice over the stone. The back door of Miller's book stuck in winter, the old wood swollen from weeks of snow, and for one terrible second it would not open. I heard the distant murmur of the square behind us, the careful movement of royal guards, the heavy silence of a town pretending it had not just witnessed the king stare at two children as if the past had risen from the grave. "Papa, you are hurting my hand," Noah whispered. Guilt cut through my panic. I loosened my grip at once and pushed the door again with my shoulder. This time it gave way, and we stumbled into the warmth of the stockroom, into the smell of paper, cinnamon tea, and the orange peels Mrs. Calloway left near the stove to make the shop feel cheerful. I shut the door, slid the bolt, and stood there listening. Nothing. No boots in the alley. No knock. No royal command. Only my own breathing, too fast and too loud, and Oliver's small voice against my collar. Did we do something bad? I set him down gently and crouched in front of both boys. They were staring at me with those impossible eyes, Adrian's eyes, the one inheritance I could never soften or explain away. "No," I said, brushing snow from Noah's lashes. "You did nothing wrong. You never do anything wrong by existing." Oliver frowned, serious in the way only he could be. "Then why did you run?" The question landed exactly where old wounds lived. I looked past them, through the cracked doorway into the little shop I had built from hiding. Shelves of used novels leaned against brick walls. A hand-painted sign advertised coffee for $1.50. The front window was fogged from the stove, but beyond it I could see Ashbourne Square, the blurred shapes of soldiers and townspeople moving like shadows behind steamed glass. 5 years ago, my name had not been Ethan Miller. It had been Ethan Hale, an Omega page in the Royal Archives of Blackwood Palace, paid to repair old books, catalog treaty records, and keep my eyes lowered. When nobles passed. I had been 20 years old, too quiet for court life and too poor to refuse palace wages. I still remembered the first time I saw Adrian not as a king, but as a man standing alone between shelves taller than church doors, one hand resting on a history of his own bloodline as if it weighed more than any crown. Back then, everyone called him ruthless in whispers, but I had seen exhaustion under the steel. I had seen loneliness hiding beneath discipline. Then one winter night changed everything, and the morning after it, I learned how quickly warmth could turn into danger when a throne was involved. "Papa." Noah tugged my sleeve, pulling me back to the present. I forced my face to calm. Children could sense fear the way birds sense storms. "We are going to play our quiet game," I told them. "The one where we pack only what fits in the blue suitcase." Noah went pale. He understood too much. We had played that game in 3 towns before Ashbourne. Oliver looked from me to his brother, then toward the front of the shop. "Are we moving again?" I opened my mouth, but the bell above the front door rang before I could answer. One clear, delicate sound. My heart stopped. Through the doorway, a royal guard stepped into the bookshop, snow melting from his black shoulders. Behind him came Mrs. Calloway, wringing her hands. And then, filling the entrance with cold air and impossible authority, came Adrian Blackwood himself. He did not look at the shelves, or the stove, or the trembling old woman beside him. His eyes found mine immediately. "Ethan Hale," he said softly, using the name I had buried. "You disappeared 5 years ago." Noah moved closer to my leg. Oliver slipped his hand into mine. Adrian's gaze dropped to them, and the room seemed to tighten around all of us. "I think," he said, voice quiet enough to be almost gentle, "you and I have a great deal to discuss." Adrian Blackwood did not enter my bookshop like a customer. He entered like winter itself had been given permission to cross the threshold. The royal guard remained by the door, stiff and silent, while Mrs. Calloway hovered near the front counter with fear written across every line of her face. The bell above the entrance gave one last nervous tremble, and then the room settled into a silence so complete I could hear the stove ticking behind me. I kept both boys close, one hand on Noah's shoulder and the other wrapped around Oliver's fingers, as if my body alone could hide them from a king who had already seen too much. "There is nothing to discuss," I said, though my voice sounded thinner than I wanted. Adrian's eyes moved over me slowly, not with cruelty, but with a carefulness that frightened me more. He was searching for the person I had been beneath the patched sweater, the ink-stained cuffs, the plain brown hair I now wore longer to soften my face. "You changed your name," he said. "I had to. You opened a bookshop. People need books." His gaze flickered to the children. "And they need fathers." The word struck the room like a dropped glass. Noah stiffened under my hand. Oliver looked up at Adrian with open confusion, too young to understand the danger in a question that had followed us through 5 years and 400 miles. I forced myself to step slightly in front of them. "Their father is gone." Adrian's expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened. "Gone where?" "That is not your concern." Everything in this town became my concern the moment 2 children looked at me with blackwood eyes. Mrs. Calloway made a small sound near the counter, and I saw Adrian notice it. Of course he noticed. He noticed everything. That had always been the terrible thing about him. In the palace, while ministers spoke for hours and courtiers bent truth into prettier shapes, Adrian had missed nothing. Not a shaking hand. Not a false smile. Not the way I had once paused too long beside his chair because his nearness had made my own heartbeat unfamiliar. "Your Majesty," Mrs. Calloway began, voice trembling, "Ethan is a good father. Those boys are loved. Whatever rumors you may have heard, this is a peaceful town." Adrian turned his head just enough to acknowledge her, and somehow that small movement made her fall silent. "I am not here for rumors," he said. Then he looked back at me. "I am here because 5 years ago, an Omega vanished from my palace during an investigation that reached the highest chambers of the crown. His room was empty. His records were erased. His scent was gone from every corridor by morning. I was told he had fled with stolen documents. My stomach dropped. I stole nothing. I know. 2 words. Soft. Impossible. They stole the breath from my lungs. I had spent years believing Adrian had ordered my name hunted through every province, that his silence had been guilt, that his court had done exactly what he wanted. But the way he said it now carried no accusation. Only certainty, and something buried beneath it that looked almost like regret. Noah, brave, reckless Noah, slipped out from behind my coat. "Mr. King," he said, tilting his head, "why do you keep looking at us funny?" My hand reached for him too late. Adrian's face changed. Not much, but enough. The hard line of his mouth loosened, and the ruthless alpha king who made grown men lower their voices was suddenly standing helpless before a child with his eyes. "Because," Adrian said carefully, crouching until he was closer to Noah's height, "you remind me of someone I lost." Oliver stepped forward too, still clutching my hand. "Papa says lost things can be found if people look carefully." Adrian's gaze lifted to mine, and the room seemed to tilt beneath that quiet sentence. He stood slowly. "Did your papa say that?" I could not speak. Every lie I had built felt paper thin in the warm little shop, surrounded by children's drawings, old novels, and the man I had tried to turn into a nightmare so I could survive missing him. Adrian reached into his coat, and I flinched before I could stop myself. He noticed, and his hand paused at once. Slowly, deliberately, he withdrew only a small leather wallet and placed a black royal card on the counter. "No guards will touch your sons," he said. "No one will remove them from this shop. But Ethan, before sunset, the council will hear what I saw in the square. When they do, they will not come gently. So I am asking you now, before they force this into a public matter. His voice dropped, quiet enough that only I could hear the wound inside it. Are they mine? I did not answer him. Not because I could not, but because every possible answer was a door, and behind each door waited a life I had spent 5 years trying to outrun. Yes would give Adrian a claim no law in the kingdom could ignore. No would be a lie so fragile even my children could hear it break. Noah looked from me to the king, his small brows drawn together, while Oliver pressed closer to my side and whispered, "Papa, what does he mean?" I knelt at once, turning both boys toward me, forcing my hands to be steady as I adjusted their scarves. "It means grown-ups are having a confusing conversation," I said softly. "And you two are going upstairs with Mrs. Calloway for cocoa." Noah frowned. "But I want to ask him why his eyes look like ours." The room went painfully still. Mrs. Calloway covered her mouth. Adrian did not move, but I saw the word strike him deeper than any accusation could have. For the first time since he crossed my threshold, he looked less like a king and more like a man standing at the edge of a truth too large to hold. "Noah," I whispered, unable to keep the shake from my voice. "Please." Something in my tone reached him. My brave, stubborn boy softened, then nodded. Mrs. Calloway hurried forward, gathering both children with the practiced warmth of someone who had helped me raise them in all the ways I was too exhausted to notice. Oliver looked back over his shoulder as they climbed the narrow stairs to the apartment above the shop. "Do not leave without us, Papa." My heart folded around the words. "Never," I promised. When the upstairs door closed, the bookshop felt suddenly larger and colder. Adrian stood near the counter, the black royal card lying between us like a blade made of paper. Outside, Ashbourne was returning to motion. Wheels passed over snow. Someone called for a child. The town was pretending normal life still existed, but inside my little shop, the past had taken off its gloves. "You should not have come here," I said. Adrian's gaze stayed on the ceiling where the boys had vanished. "I could say the same to you, but you have made a home." "I made a hiding place." "With children's drawings in the window?" he asked quietly. "With a crooked sign and a jar of peppermint sticks by the register." I hated that he had noticed those things. I hated that his voice turned gentle around them. "Do not make this sentimental. I am trying to understand how you survived." "I survived because you were not there." The words left me sharper than I intended, but I did not take them back. Adrian absorbed them in silence. His face remained controlled, yet his fingers curled once against the edge of the counter before going still. "I looked for you." A bitter laugh escaped me. "Your counsel looked for me." "No," he said, and the single word carried the weight of command without ever rising. "I did." I turned away because looking at him made memory too vivid. The polished black floors of Blackwood Palace. The Northern Library with its tall windows and locked archives. The smell of old paper, cedar smoke, and winter rain clinging to Adrian's coat when he came in long after midnight to read reports no one else was allowed to see. I had been nothing then. A quiet Omega page with ink on my fingers and rent money sent home in carefully folded envelopes. I was supposed to shelve books, avoid politics, and disappear before sunrise. But Adrian had seen me. That had been the beginning of everything beautiful and everything terrible. "Do you remember the snowstorm?" he asked. I closed my eyes. Of course I remembered. The whole palace had gone silent under 30 inches of snow, the roads blocked, the city lights blurred white beyond the glass. I had found him in the library after midnight, not wearing a crown, not surrounded by ministers, just sitting on the floor beside a fallen stack of treaties, one hand pressed to his temple as if the kingdom itself had become too loud inside his skull. I should have bowed and left. Instead, I had made him tea in the little archive kitchen and told him that even kings were allowed to be tired. He had looked at me then as if no one had ever given him permission to be human. "I remember enough," I said. Adrian stepped closer, stopping several feet away, careful not to corner me. "Then remember this. The morning after, I told the council an omega beside the throne was a liability. Because there were listening ears behind the west wall. I said what I had to say so they would believe you meant nothing to me. My breath caught. That is convenient. It is the truth. The truth is that I heard you. My voice cracked despite every wall I had built. I heard you call me a weakness. I heard them discuss removing weaknesses before they became scandals. And then I found out I was carrying your children. Adrian went utterly pale. Not with anger. With devastation. At last, the ruthless king had no mask strong enough to hide the man beneath it. Ethan, he said, barely above a whisper. I never knew. Upstairs, a small wooden toy clattered to the floor, followed by Oliver's laugh, bright and innocent and alive. Adrian looked toward the sound as if it had reached into his chest and changed the rhythm of his heart. Then the bell above the shop door rang again. This time, the man who entered wore the silver pin of the royal council. The councilman brought the cold with him. It moved through the shop ahead of his polished shoes, sharper than the snow outside, cleaner than fear, the kind of cold that belonged to marble halls and sealed documents. He was an older alpha with silver at his temples, dressed in a charcoal coat that looked too expensive for Ashbourne and too severe for a place that smelled of books and cinnamon. His eyes passed over me once, dismissing me as quickly as court men always had, then fixed on Adrian with a bow so precise it felt like an accusation. Your Majesty, he said. Lord Voss, Adrian replied, and the temperature in his voice dropped. You are far from the capital. As are you. Lord Voss straightened, glancing at the guard near the door and then at the staircase behind me. Reports reached the council that 2 children in this town bear unmistakable Blackwood traits. Naturally, we came to assist in clarifying the matter before speculation spreads. My stomach tightened. Assist. Clarify. Such clean words for taking control of lives that did not belong to him. Adrian stepped slightly to the side, not in retreat, but to place himself between Lord Voss and the stairs. The movement was small, but I saw it. So did Voss. His brows lifted by the smallest degree. There is no matter for the council here, Adrian said. That is difficult to accept, Your Majesty, considering the witnesses in the square. The royal bloodline is not a village rumor. It is a national concern. The royal bloodline is mine to address. With respect, the royal bloodline belongs to the crown. I felt the old palace walls close around me again. That was how they spoke of people in Blackwood Palace, as if blood could be catalogued, sealed, and stored beside land deeds. I remembered standing behind archive shelves 5 years ago, one hand pressed over the new and impossible life inside me, listening while men like Voss discussed the dangers of unsanctioned heirs, unsuitable omegas, and public instability. No one had said my name then. They had not needed to. I had known what I was. A problem before I was a person. From upstairs came the soft scrape of a chair, and Lord Voss turned his head toward the sound. Are the children above? I moved before thinking, stepping directly in front of the staircase. My legs shook, but I did not move back. They are 5 years old, I said. They are drinking cocoa. That is all they are doing. Lord Voss finally looked at me properly, and recognition flickered through his face like a candle behind glass. Ethan Hale. My old name in his mouth made my skin go cold. We believed you had vanished permanently. I tried. That was unwise. Adrian's voice cut in, low and controlled. Choose your next words carefully. Voss paused. For the first time, his confidence cracked around the edges. He looked from Adrian to me, then to the royal card still lying on the counter. Something sharp and calculating settled in his expression. Your Majesty, if these children are potentially yours, then protocol requires immediate protection, relocation to a secure royal property, and a private lineage confirmation overseen by the council. My breath vanished. Relocation. Secure property. Lineage confirmation. The words blurred together until all I could see was Noah's hand reaching for mine and Oliver asking if we were moving again. No, I said. It was barely a whisper, but it filled the whole shop. Voss turned to me with polite impatience. This is not a parental preference. Adrian moved then, one step forward, and the old floorboards gave a soft groan beneath his boots. It is not a council decision either. Voss stiffened. Your Majesty, you cannot allow sentiment to interfere with succession law. You do not know what I allow. The words were quiet, but even the fire in the stove seemed to shrink from them. You will leave this shop. You will tell the council that I am handling the matter personally. You will not speak of the children, you will not send riders, and you will not place their names in any record until I command it. Lord Voss held his ground for 3 heartbeats, then bowed with the careful anger of a man forced to retreat in public. As you wish. But by sunrise, the full council will demand answers. His gaze slid to me one last time. And secrets, Mr. Hale, rarely survive daylight. The bell rang as he left, bright and cruel in the silence. Only when the door closed did I realize my hands were trembling. Adrian turned toward me, the mask of the king still on his face, but his eyes were fixed on the stairs with something raw and newly awakened. Pack what they need for one night, he said. I stepped back. You promised no one would remove them. And I will keep that promise. His voice softened, not enough to erase the danger outside, but enough to reach the terrified part of me still trapped in that palace corridor 5 years ago. I am not taking them from you, Ethan. I am asking you to let me keep the council from taking them from us. Upstairs, Noah laughed at something Oliver said, 2 bright notes of sound floating down through the ceiling. Adrian closed his eyes for half a second, as if those small voices were the answer to a question he had been afraid to ask. When he opened them again, he looked at me not as a king, not as the man I had feared, but as the father he had just discovered he might be. Please, he said. Do not run from me tonight. I wanted to believe him. That was the most dangerous part. Not the council waiting beyond the snow, not Lord Voss carrying our secret back toward the capital, not the old laws that could turn my sons into royal property before breakfast. The dangerous part was Adrian standing in my little bookshop with his crown hidden beneath a black winter coat, asking instead of commanding, his voice lowered around my fear as if he remembered exactly how easily trust could shatter. I looked toward the ceiling where Noah and Oliver were laughing with Mrs. Calloway, and my chest ached with the simple, impossible sound of them being safe for one more minute. One night, I said. Adrian did not move, but relief passed through his eyes like a shadow crossing ice. One night, he repeated. And they stay with me. Always. I searched his face for the king who once made me run, for the cold man in the council chamber who had called an omega beside the throne a liability. I still found him there, but underneath him was the man from the snowstorm, the one who had accepted a chipped mug of tea from my hands like it was the first kindness he had been given in years. That memory followed me upstairs as I packed. The apartment above the shop was small, barely 800 square feet, with slanted ceilings, 2 narrow bedrooms, and a kitchen table scarred by years of homework, spilled soup, and candle wax from storms that knocked out the power. Noah and Oliver sat on the rug in their pajamas while Mrs. Calloway folded tiny socks with trembling hands. Are we going on an adventure? Oliver asked. Just for tonight, I said, placing their toothbrushes, 2 sweaters, and the stuffed rabbit Noah pretended he no longer needed into the blue suitcase. Noah watched me too carefully. Is it because of the man with the silver pin? I knelt in front of him. It is because some grown-ups are asking questions before they know how to be kind. He considered that, then looked toward the stairs. Is the king kind? The question opened a door in my mind I had kept locked for 5 years. I remembered Adrian in the royal library, snow pressing against the tall windows while the palace slept under a white silence. I had found him surrounded by reports, his shoulders tense beneath a dark shirt, his crown abandoned on the table beside him like something too heavy to wear. He had not ordered me away. He had only said, "Do you ever wish the world would stop needing you for 1 hour?" I had been foolish enough to answer honestly. Every day. That was why he had looked at me. Not as an Omega page. Not as palace staff. As someone who understood the loneliness of being useful and unseen. For weeks after that, our meetings had remained innocent, made of tea, books, and conversations whispered between midnight and dawn. He asked what stories I loved. I told him about ordinary people who found homes in impossible places. He told me that kings did not get homes, only territories. I should have known then that loving him would feel like trying to warm a snowstorm with my bare hands. I do not know, I finally told Noah, because children deserve truth even when it was small. But I think he wants to be. Downstairs, the bell rang once, then stopped, as if someone had touched it and thought better of entering. Adrian called my name, calm but urgent. I told Mrs. Calloway to stay with the boys and went down with the suitcase in hand. The shop lights were dim now, the windows blue with evening. Adrian stood by the front door, reading a folded note that had been pushed through the mail slot. His face had gone completely still. "What is it?" I asked. He handed it to me. The message was short, written in the formal script of the Royal Council. By sunrise, the children will be collected for protective custody under succession protocol. My fingers went numb around the paper. Adrian's voice was quiet when he spoke, but the whole shop seemed to feel it. "We are out of time." The words on the council note blurred until they no longer looked like ink. They looked like a cage. Protective custody. Succession protocol. Phrases built to sound clean enough for law, but I knew what they meant when applied to 2 5-year-old boys with royal blood and no official place in the world. Noah and Oliver would be taken somewhere with white walls, guarded doors, and adults who spoke over their heads as if their feelings were inconvenient details. I crushed the paper in my fist. No, Adrian was already moving, not with panic, but with the swift precision of someone who had spent his life making decisions while everyone else was still learning how to breathe. He crossed to the front window, pulled the curtain aside an inch, and looked out at the darkening street. "There are 3 council carriages at the east end of town," he said. Voss did not wait for sunrise. "Then we leave now." The words came from me before I had a plan. Running was the old language of my body. Pack the blue suitcase. Take the back alley. Avoid main roads. Change names by morning. Find a town where no one asked questions. I turned toward the stairs, but Adrian's voice stopped me. "If you run alone, they will follow you forever." I spun back. "And if I stay, they take my sons." "Not if they are under my protection." "Your protection is the reason they want them." For the first time, anger broke through my fear, hot and bright enough to steady my hands. "Do you understand that? The moment you looked at them in that square, their childhood became a government matter." Adrian flinched as if I had touched an old bruise. Then his gaze dropped to the crumpled note in my hand. "You are right." That quiet admission disarmed me more than any argument could have. Kings did not say that. Not the kings I knew. Not the men who had raised Adrian to believe apology was a weakness and affection was a liability. He took a slow breath and looked toward the ceiling, where our sons were still sheltered in the small warm apartment above us. "Then I will make them more than a matter." I stared at him. "What does that mean?" "It means the council can seize unregistered heirs for confirmation, but they cannot remove acknowledged royal children from the direct custody of the reigning king without a public challenge before the full court." My pulse stumbled. Acknowledged? Adrian looked at me then, and the ruthless mask was gone. What stood in its place was far more frightening: certainty. "If they are mine, I acknowledge them tonight." The room tilted. For 5 years, I had imagined this moment as a nightmare. Adrian discovering the twins, claiming them, turning our lives into a royal command. But he was not reaching for power. He was offering To use it as a wall between our children and the people coming for them. You do not even have proof, I whispered. His eyes softened, just barely. Ethan, I saw proof the moment Noah looked at me. My throat tightened. Upstairs, small footsteps crossed the ceiling, followed by Oliver's voice asking Mrs. Calloway whether Kings ate grilled cheese. The absurd sweetness of it nearly broke me. Adrian heard it too. A sound passed through him, not quite a laugh, not quite pain. They deserve better than a legal ambush in the dark. They deserve not to be born into this at all. I know. His answer was immediate, and that made it hurt more. But they were. And I will not let the council be the first part of my world they meet. A knock sounded at the front door. Not loud. Not violent. 3 measured taps, polite enough to be cruel. The royal guard looked to Adrian. Mrs. Calloway appeared halfway down the stairs, pale, with both boys behind her in their coats. Noah was holding the stuffed rabbit by one ear. Oliver clutched the wooden horse with the broken leg. My heart lurched. Papa? Noah asked. Are the unkind grown-ups here? I crossed the room and gathered both boys against me before I could answer. Adrian turned toward the door, then lowered himself to one knee in front of them. The sight stole the air from the room. The Alpha King, feared from the capital to the northern border, kneeling on the worn floorboards of my bookshop before 2 confused little boys in winter boots. Noah. Oliver, he said, his voice calm and careful. Some people outside want to make decisions about you without asking your father. I am not going to let them do that. Oliver studied him with solemn blue eyes. Because you are the king. Adrian glanced at me, and in that brief look I saw the question he was asking permission to answer. My fingers tightened in the boys' coats. I gave the smallest nod. Adrian looked back at them. Because I am your father. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of every year I had hidden, every lie I had told to keep them safe, every bedtime question I had answered with half-truths because the full truth was too heavy for children. Noah looked at Adrian for a long moment, then at me. Papa? My voice trembled. It is true. The knock came again, harder this time. Adrian stood, and when he faced the door, the king had returned. But this time, he was not the king I had run from. He was the wall between my children and the storm. Open it, he ordered. The guard obeyed. Lord Voss stood outside with 3 council officers behind him, their silver pins bright against the snow. Before Voss could speak, Adrian stepped forward and took Noah's hand in one of his and Oliver's in the other. You will inform the council, he said, each word carrying through the shop like a bell, that the children are under my personal protection as acknowledged sons of the Blackwood line. Voss went still. His eyes flicked to the boys, then to me, then back to Adrian. Your Majesty, that declaration cannot be undone. Adrian's grip on the twins' hands tightened gently, not holding them in place, but promising he would not let go first. Good, he said. Then let the whole kingdom hear it. Lord Voss did not argue in front of the children. That was the first sign that he was more dangerous than he looked. He only bowed, lips pressed into a thin line, while the council officers behind him exchanged careful glances through the falling snow. As you command, Your Majesty, he said, but nothing in his voice surrendered. The council will convene before dawn. Adrian stood in the doorway with Noah's hand in his right and Oliver's in his left, black coat moving slightly in the winter wind, his face calm enough to frighten everyone except the 2 boys staring up at him. Then tell them I will arrive with my sons and their father. Their father. The words landed differently that time. Not as a claim against me, not as a correction of the life I had built, but as a bridge he was trying to place carefully over 5 years of silence. Voss looked at me then, and I saw the calculation in his eyes. If he could not take the children quietly, he would try to turn the kingdom against the Omega who had hidden them. Mr. Hale, he said, I hope you understand what public acknowledgement will invite. Questions. Records. Examinations of your absence. Adrian's voice sharpened. Enough. But I stepped forward before he could say more. My hands were cold, my heart was racing, and I was still afraid, but fear had carried me for too long. It had carried me out of the palace, across 400 miles, through nights when the twins cried from hunger and I pretended crackers and warm milk were a special dinner. It had carried me into false names, cheap rooms, and locked doors. It would not speak for me now. My absence has a simple explanation, I said. I was afraid of men who called children protocol before they had even met them. For the first time, Lord Voss had no immediate answer. Adrian looked at me, and something proud and painful moved across his face. Then Noah tugged his hand. Do we have to go to the castle? Not tonight, Adrian said. Tonight we go somewhere safe. Does safe have grilled cheese? Oliver asked. The corner of Adrian's mouth softened, almost breaking. I will make sure it does. Mrs. Calloway cried when she locked the bookshop behind us. She hugged the boys twice, tucked extra peppermint sticks into their coat pockets, and pressed my blue suitcase into my hand like she was sending part of her own heart into the snow. A royal car waited at the curb, black and silent, its windows dark against the lamplight. I hesitated before getting in. The last time I had entered a royal vehicle, I had been a palace employee with no choices. This time, Noah climbed in first, declaring the leather seats too slippery, and Oliver followed, asking Adrian whether kings knew how to fix wooden horses. Adrian looked helplessly at the broken toy in Oliver's hands. I can learn. Something inside me twisted. It would have been easier if he had remained only cruel in my memory. Cruelty was simple. This careful gentleness was not. The car pulled away from Ashbourne Square, past the bakery, the post office, the schoolhouse, and finally the little bookshop with its painted sign swinging in the wind. My hiding place grew smaller behind us until snow swallowed it. Adrian sat across from me, the boys between us, already growing sleepy from fear and warmth. Noah leaned against my side. Oliver's head nodded against Adrian's sleeve, and Adrian went completely still, as if a sleeping child were more intimidating than any council chamber. I watched him lower his gaze to Oliver's dark curls. His hand lifted, then stopped, silently asking permission. I nodded once. He rested his palm gently near Oliver's shoulder, not possessive, not certain, just present. The sight broke something open in me that I was not ready to name. After I left, I said quietly, I waited for you to come. Adrian's eyes lifted to mine. The road hummed beneath us. Snow streaked across the windows like pale stars. I went back to the palace border for 3 nights, I continued. I thought if you cared, you would know where to look. His face changed. Not dramatically. Adrian had been trained too well for that. But grief moved through his eyes, deep and unmistakable. I was told you were dead. My breath caught. What? The night you disappeared, there was a fire in the West Archive. They found a body in the outer passage with your access badge beside it. The car seemed to tilt beneath me. I remembered smoke in the distance as I ran through the service road, one hand over my stomach, the other clutching a satchel of clothes. I had thought the fire was a distraction caused by the same people who wanted me gone. No, I whispered. I was alive. I know that now. His voice was rougher than before. But for 5 years, I believed the council's enemies had taken you from me because I let them think you mattered too little. The old story inside me shifted, and I hated how much it hurt. I had made him the villain because grief needed a shape. He had made himself a monster because he thought softness had cost me my life. Oliver stirred in his sleep and murmured, "Do not be sad, Mr. King." Adrian closed his eyes for 1 second, and when he opened them, they were bright with restraint. I am trying not to be. The car turned from the main road onto a private lane lined with dark pines. Ahead, lights glowed through the snowfall, not the palace, but a smaller royal lodge hidden beyond the trees. Safe, for now. But as we stopped beneath the covered entrance, Adrian's phone lit up in his hand. He read the message, and the fragile warmth in the car vanished. "The council has moved the hearing," he said. "They are not waiting until morning." I held Noah closer. "When?" Adrian looked from me to our sleeping sons, his voice low and urgent. "In 1 hour." The royal lodge was warm, bright, and meaningless because in 1 hour strangers would decide whether my children belonged to themselves. Servants moved quietly through pine-paneled halls, bringing blankets, soup, and the grilled cheese sandwiches Oliver had asked for, but none of it felt real. Noah and Oliver sat at a long kitchen table still wearing their winter coats, too tired to eat more than a few bites, while Adrian stood near the window with his phone in one hand and the weight of a kingdom on his shoulders. I watched him issue orders in a low voice, not threats, not fury, just calm instructions that made every person around him move faster. When he ended the call, he turned to me. "The council is meeting by secure broadcast from the capital. They expect me to appear alone." I looked at the boys. Noah had fallen asleep with his cheek against the table. Oliver was curled beside him, one hand still holding the repaired wooden horse Adrian's driver had fixed with a strip of leather from his glove. "Then surprise them," I said. Adrian studied me. "Ethan, once you stand with me publicly, your quiet life changes." A tired laugh rose in my throat. My quiet life ended in the square. I stepped closer, keeping my voice soft so the boys would not wake. For 5 years, I thought protecting them meant hiding. Tonight I finally understand that hiding only taught them to be afraid of the truth. I do not want them to inherit fear from me. Something in Adrian's face shifted, not relief exactly, but recognition. He took the blue suitcase from beside the door and set it down like he was setting down a weapon neither of us needed anymore. The hearing began in the lodge study beneath a chandelier shaped like bare winter branches. Faces appeared on a wall screen, 12 council members in dark formal clothes, with Lord Voss seated at the center. Their expressions changed when they saw me enter beside Adrian with Noah in my arms and Oliver holding Adrian's hand. "Your Majesty," Voss said tightly, "this session concerns matters of succession. The children should not be present." Adrian's answer was quiet. "The children are the matter, and they will not be discussed as objects while their father stands outside the room." I felt Noah stir against my shoulder. Oliver hid slightly behind Adrian's coat, but did not let go of his hand. The council asked for proof. They asked for timelines, palace records, medical confirmation, witness statements. Each question was polished, careful, and cold. I answered what I could. Adrian answered the rest. Then Voss leaned forward. "Mr. Hale concealed royal heirs for 5 years. That cannot be ignored." My chest tightened, but Adrian spoke before fear could swallow me. "Mr. Hale protected 2 children from a council that sent officers to collect them before asking their names." Silence filled the screen. Adrian stepped forward, and for the first time that night, he sounded not ruthless, but absolute. "I have spent years ruling as if love made me weak. That belief made me obedient to fear, and fear allowed this council to treat my family as a problem to manage. That ends tonight. Noah and Oliver are my sons. Ethan Hale is their father and their legal guardian. No protocol will separate them from him. Any confirmation of lineage will be voluntary, private, and conducted with both parents present. If any council member objects, they may do so publicly before the people whose children they claim to protect." No one spoke. Not Voss, not the officers, not the polished faces from the capital. Power had shifted, not because Adrian had raised his voice, but because he had finally placed it where it belonged, around the vulnerable instead of over them. At last, one elderly councilwoman lowered her gaze. "The king's declaration is entered into record." The hearing ended less than 5 minutes later. When the screen went dark, I realized I was crying. Adrian turned, alarm flashing through his eyes, but I shook my head. I am all right. Noah blinked awake and touched my cheek. Papa, are we still moving? I looked at Adrian, then at Oliver, then through the window where snow was falling softly over the pines. For the first time in years, I did not measure the distance to the nearest road. No, I said. Not tonight. Adrian knelt before the boys again, no crown, no council, no crowd, only a father learning the shape of his own family. I missed a lot, he said gently. I cannot get those years back, but I would like to be here for the next ones, if you let me. Oliver considered him seriously. Can you come to breakfast? Adrian's eyes softened. Yes. Noah yawned. And story time? Yes. I looked at the man I had loved, feared, blamed, and finally understood. The past had not vanished. It would take time, truth, and more courage than running ever had. But when Adrian reached for my hand, he did not pull. He waited. I placed my hand in his because the choice was mine. Years later, people would still tell stories about the night the ruthless king defied his counsel for two small boys with winter blue eyes. But I would remember something quieter, a bookshop bell, a blue suitcase left unopened, and the first morning our sons woke up without asking where we would run next.